again to those of you who are here. I'm coming to you from California, but I'm also coming to you from the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, which is where my mother's people are from. And God bless the Pulpwood Academy. They invited me to come speak to you, which knocked me out. And I had to sort of sit down and think, why now? I know why now for a pulpwood, but is there a greater meaning for me and for the book? Why would I be speaking about this now? The book was published in 2012. Well, Pulpwood Academy and Pulpwood readers have been kind enough to feature this book. Here's the book, Going to Solace. This is a September pick for the book clubs this coming September, and I'll lift this up again. So Pulpwood asked if I might come in and speak to the readers who may be reading it in September. So for those of you who are writers, you know that that's the plot reason, but plot isn't always story. So again, I was thinking, well, what's the story behind my speaking to you about this book today? And I just want to say, I'm keenly aware I can't actually see you, which just drives me nuts. But I think everybody who joins me here today, we are really going through something right now. And what we're going through is so overwhelming with illness, and these are themes in my book, and with what does it mean to be a neighbor? What does a community mean? What does it mean? Am I my brother's keeper? All of these things that are, we're stuck at home. For some of us, this is a joy. For others of us, it's a nightmare. I mean, we're all going through a lot. If you're anything like me, I just have this huge sine wave of experience. Some of us are in terrible financial trouble. And I just want to pause, first of all, to say, just thank you for being here. My heart is going out to you if you're having a hard time right now. And maybe just thinking about stories about people trying to do the best they can in tough circumstances, which is, the book will help us talk about that. Maybe that'll be worth our time. So I'm really, really glad you're here. Okay, so having said that, I know I'm going to be speaking to some people who do not know this book. And again, God knows, I'm not here to push this book, but I'm here to introduce you to the book, Going to Solace, and some of you may be reading it. Some of you have read it already. I think we have things to talk about here that work for us all. For those of you who don't know this book, let me just give you a quick outline about what's up here. It's a novel. It was published in late 2012. It very nicely received. By the way, my second book is right now in submission and the third is on the way. So yeah, I'm in process as a writer. I did a book tour with this book, and so I want to tell you about the book on the page, but the book has also had a life as a book out there in the universe with readers. So we've got two things to talk about. As a book, this book is set in the world of my mother's people, so the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. It's a fictionalized version of that. We happen to be in 1989. I'll tell you why later. And the book takes place over just 6 days, the 6 days of Thanksgiving week. So we're marching forward to Thanksgiving. And what we're doing in this book is we're following some mismatched characters, 3 in particular, and their families. And they don't know each other, but their paths are going to cross during the novel. One of them, 1989, Blue Ridge Mountains, one of these characters is August Early. August Early is a retired trucker, and he's got a problem. His wife is quite ill. He's a man who has not only never been in a hospital, he's never even ridden in an elevator before. August Early is headed for trouble because his wife's in trouble. We've got Cadence Greevy. Cadence Greevy is, well, those who know her describe her as a big little girl. She's 14 years of age, but she's maybe 8 years old in terms of how well she can think. Turns out her mother is really quite ill, and she is the only person there to take care of her. Cadence and August Early And the third character, main character that we're following is Maggie Dulay. Now, her actual name is Margaret Dull. She was a woman. These people were all born in this same Blue Ridge town. I call it Little Piney. And Maggie Dulay was born Margaret Dull, which horrified her. So the second she got old enough, she moved the heck out of there. She moved to California. She changed her name. She developed a whole life. And now suddenly her mother is sick and she's having to come back to the Blue Ridge Mountains to deal with it as fast as she can. Find somebody to take care of her mother so she can get back to her life. These characters don't know each other, but they're all doing the same thing. They're going to Solace, because Solace in this book is a hospice there in the mountains. So they're going to Solace. Their paths are going to cross. We readers know them before they know each other. It's a way, through this story, we get to think about things like how do very different people interact with each other? How do people help each other? How do people fail each other? It's a book about the caretakers of the ill. So that those who are ill are important in this book, but we're following the caretakers, some of whom have it's just hit them. So it's so COVID. It's just hit them out of the blue. Somebody's sick and their whole life is turned upside down, and they're just family members. They're not professionals. Others are professional. There are other characters who are nurses and doctors and so forth who are helping. So these threads take us to Solace, and there are resolutions that occur as these people's paths cross. So that's what's up with the novel. Listen, this book is about what I admire, which I so admire the everyday person, the average person, the ordinary person, again, just like us in COVID. All heck breaks loose. The world is falling apart, and the level of resourcefulness and creativity that people bring to this it just knocks me out. The other thing that just knocks me out is when we fail in these situations. And we see both kinds of characters in this book. And I hope the book inspires a kind of forgiveness about those who are doing the best they can, and maybe it's not quite good enough, and others who are doing just great, and so forth and so on. So in terms of plot, this book, Going to Solace, has some deep resonance right now. It's, by the way, what's the mood? What's the feeling? It reflects what I want to say about what I loved the most, about what I was given as, particularly as a young person, which is a blend of kind of funny, sad, funny. For both traditions in my family, my father's tradition, Irish Catholic, my mother's tradition, really Presbyterian, of a certain kooky ilk on both sides. Man, if you're crying, you're laughing. I mean, if you're telling a joke, you're weeping. It's making you laugh so hard. If you're at a funeral, you're telling the funniest jokes about whoever it is that we've missed. And I admire and love that. And so I hope this book invokes some of that for people. And I feel like I need it. So that's all true. I promised you, I said that also. It's been really fun. I mean, this book's been out for a while. It's been really fun to think about the book. As I say, it's had readers all over the nation, and it's been read by book clubs all over the nation. And I just want to tell you a story about that. I've visited book clubs in person, and I've visited book clubs virtually before we were all living virtually like this. And in doing so, what a pleasure for me to just sit back and listen and talk with readers about things. I have pursued a particular angle on those meetings. I've let the conversation go, and now you guys, I'm letting you in on something about this book that I normally don't tell people, because I don't want to influence people's reading experience of the book. But I will do so here, because I've been invited to speak, and I think I should be speaking to this right now. I'm at a book club. Conversation goes on. At some point, I tend to listen when I'm there. But at some point I will ask the readers about a particular character. It depends what my mood is, but let's say I ask about the character Bernice. There's a character who's a nurse, who's Bernice in the book, and she's a prickly one. And I just ask them how she landed with them, and that there's usually a good conversation about that, because some people dig her grit and some people she rubs the wrong way. So we talk about that for a minute. And then I'll ask, after all of that, I'll say, well, so what does Bernice look like? And one reader will say she's African American, another reader will say she's white. And they will both, the next thing that always happens is they quote chapter and verse. This is what we would say in my Christian heritage. They go to the text and they tell you why they're right. And then they will turn to me, the author, and ask me to adjudicate, to say who's right. And I will say, you're both right. Because as this book developed for me, and as I saw what kind of story I was writing, and I want to say this with humility, I'm just telling you what I was up to. I hope successfully, but what I was up to as I developed the book was seeing how many kinds of readers I could welcome into a story that feels quite universal. The struggle to take care of a loved one, the struggle to not take care of a hated one, the struggle to deal with some neighbor or community person that you can't stand. And so these things are so universal. So as I was thinking about that, I began to shape about 50% of the characters in the book are vividly described, but in relative terms. An easy example is one character is described as being the color of a wet potato. Well, a wet potato can run the gamut. Readers, I've never had a reader come to me and say, hey, what do you mean by this? All readers read that and they see what they see, which is true of all books, you guys, as we know, right? I mean, when I read War and Peace and you read War and Peace, we're reading different books. The experiment, or the way I explored the story of going to Solace, heightens those kinds of differences. And I wanted to do that. A, to invite readers in, and B, what I've gained from the life of this book with readers is the aha everybody gets about, oh my gosh, I had no idea how much I was co-writing a book as I read it. That's number one. And number two, oh, there's no right or wrong here, but what are the assumptions I'm bringing to the characters I'm reading? What is the knowledge I'm bringing? What are the stereotypes I'm bringing? Not just about race, by no means. In this book, for instance, people read very differently depending on what they understand, quote, the South to be, whether they have a sense for the regional differences between, say, pockets in Appalachia and pockets in the Deep South and so forth. So it's wide, 50% of those characters are wide open for that reader to see in any way he, she likes. The other 50% are very carefully, visually described, because I'm creating a world that's very much like the world I grew up in my particular family. I wanted to write a story about the aspirational admiration that a white family and a white woman and a white girl can feel about people of color, because that's the way I was raised. So I've never ever had a reader point this out to me. It's buried way down inside the architecture of the book. But if you took the book apart and did a little analysis, you would notice that the most educated people in the book, the most authoritative people in the book, the people with the most power in the book, tend to be people with darker skin. And this is where we come back to, I said it in 1989. I did that for a reason. This is right when rural Appalachia began to really have trouble finding American-born MDs to come work in the area. And so an area like the area I grew up in was beginning to see, and welcome or not welcome, in my case, in my book, welcome, doctors coming in from all kinds of traditions and countries. And that's just one small example here. I wanted to write about that because that was my experience, and I think it's underrepresented in literature. This point of view about, well, first of all, about what I so admire in the many cultures of people of color. That's number one. And number two, what I admire about how people cope with whatever their differences might be. I'm born of Irish Catholic on one side, Presbyterian on the other, and I am telling you what, it was not pretty back then. They did not like each other. So that interests me a lot. All I can ever do is introduce you to a book and hope you guys will become friends. And if there's any way I can help make the connection, great. One thought for all of you, for those of you who have not read the book, it's never occurred to me before, but it would be fun, never mind a book club if you're not a book club person. If it sounds like something you want to explore, boy, I'd go and look for one other reader to do it with so that you can have this kind of conversation. And maybe don't clue them in to what I'm telling you about the nature of the book, or maybe clue them in. I think it's really, again, I feel like I'm kind of ruining the book for you because you're going to be looking for this now. And the reader who hasn't heard me talk about this is just reading a novel. But it's in talking to another reader. It cannot be until then that it would even occur to you to read it another way. So, maybe it's a buddy book. Is that a new category, a buddy book? But let me return my heart for a second to where we're actually at. I just heard last night about this is going to get me all teared up, a good friend of mine who I had no idea he's just 2 months in the hospital with COVID, and I think 6 weeks of that he was on a ventilator, and he made it. He made it, and he's struggling through with lingering physical issues. But my goodness, and I can't imagine. Jobs are gone, and so I don't want to float a superficial conversation out here to you guys about a book and a story, but we're all here because we turn to them when things are tough. And I think that racial conversation is difficult. So this might be a way to explore that for yourself. So it looks like what folks would like to do is look for the recording later. So what I'm going to do here is just wrap up for a second. I'm reachable. I'm reachable here, Facebook, and I can, provide you contact information if you contact me on Facebook. Wave at me and say Pulpwood because I get confused about how I know people. I'm getting that old. If you want to talk more about this, we can do it on a less shaky platform. But Pulpwood, thank you a brilliant million for giving me this opportunity to just not chat but speak with you, and I hope we'll continue. So much love, and thank you so much, everybody, and take care.